Welcome to this Consult a Specialist session. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mark Terrell, and he is the founder of the Relucted Leader Academy. And as part of that, he uses a tool called Motivational Maps, and that's our topic for today. So welcome, Mark.
Hello, thank you for the invite. Looking forward to it.
My pleasure. So I wanted to start off our conversation about what is motivation?
Great question, because a lot of people don't really understand what motivation is, because there are things out there or people out there that call themselves motivational speakers, which seem to indicate that it's something that we get from somebody else. But actually, motivation is very internal. It's actually what drives us. It's our motive to take action or do something. So that's why motivation is important. It's understanding what that is, what your strongest motives are to take action. And also, it's actually really useful to know exactly what doesn't motivate you as well, because that can have a big bearing on your decisions, and they can also, if you actually address that, you can actually open up doors that maybe that weren't opening up for you before.
Fab. So, and I suppose it's that kind of self-awareness piece, isn't it? The better that you understand yourself, the better decisions that you can make, but also that understanding of other people's motivators, can help you understand them better. So in terms of motivational maps, if we just explore that a little bit, is it 9 motivators in the motivational maps?
That's right, yeah. So motivational maps are a tool which give us a language around motivation. And that's the crucial thing here, is that once you can describe something and also measure it, then you can start doing something and maximizing it and maintaining it and those things. So that's essentially what motivational maps does, with a quick 15 to 20 minute online diagnostic it takes to complete. And then you get a report which tells you, with the 9 motivations, which order they come in for you, which ones are most important down to the ones that are least important. It gives you a strength for each one of them. So it tells you how strong they are. And that has obviously a bearing on things as well. And then overall, then it gives you, within the motivational map report, it gives you strategies for your top 3 motivators that you can implement straight away in your sort of day-to-day, and especially in your work.
Excellent. And we haven't really got time to kind of delve into all 9 today, but they're grouped as well, aren't they, into 3 sort of categories? Could you just explain a little bit about those for me?
Yeah, so there's what we call 3 clusters, where we cluster 3, the 9 are grouped into 3 groups of 3. There is a group which we call the relationship cluster, which is around obviously relationships, and they're all dependent on other people. Then there's the achievement motivators, and they are about achieving things, surprisingly. And then there's the growth motivators, which are very much about what you want to be in the future. So it's growth on a personal level, what you want to achieve in the future. And it's quite useful to remember that if you think about it, the relationship motivators are based on what's happened to us, very much so. The achievement motivators are about what's happening now, so what we're achieving now. And the growth motivators are very much future focused, so what we want to be in the future, about freedom and autonomy and innovations and making a difference. So that's why we group them into those groups of or clusters, what we call them. So we get an idea of where that focus is, whether it's past, present, or future focused.
Interesting. So in terms of, obviously, I work with software companies and helping them improve the customer experience from sales to service. So how can motivation help or hinder the sales and sort of implementation process?
Well, when we talk about sales, straight away we start thinking about money, don't we? And you think that most sales are driven by money. But the question is, actually, are sales driven by money? Or is there something else going on? So if we think about what I've just said about motivations, our motive to take action, first you've got to think about the motive to buy something, and why someone. And so if you can tap into or have an idea of what the motive is, then you can then, rather than selling to them around, just on the logic and the features of a product, you can actually then start tapping into the emotion of why that person or that organization needs your service or your product. So motivation has a part to play in that, making sure that actually realizing that actually what we've got to do in a sales environment is actually tap into that reason, going back to the reason why someone's going to buy, rather than just assuming that there's some sort of logic around it. There might be something more deep. And when we talk about, I've done quite a lot of work with sales teams, and obviously I don't train them in sales skills. I just tap into what motivates them, and then what we can do then is the team leader is they can use that information to get the best out of them. Because if we are getting our motivations met, we're going to be far more productive and far more happier in our role. And then naturally we then do things maybe a little bit more outside our comfort zone. So the power there is understanding and tapping in individually, which then has a benefit for the team and then for the organization, but then has a knock-on effect with the way that we deal with our clients, because ultimately every employee is working on behalf of the business. And so if they are in their best place and they're motivated, they're bound to be giving better customer service, doing all the things that they should be doing, because their needs are being met. And let's face it, we've got to remember what's in it for them as much as it is for us. So motivation has a part to play in sales in a major way. And if it's not just about sale, if it's about making a difference, then you want to have people on board, especially within, I think sales is very much around, as much about selling, it's about customer service as well, making a difference. So when you have an idea of what motivates your team, your sales team, you've got a better idea or more handle on how to motivate them to get the best from them. And then they will should give a much better experience to the customer.
So what I'm hearing here, that we've got two sides of it, really, haven't we? We've got the motivations within the software organization and their team, and what motivates them for them to be doing a good job. And then on the flip side of that, we've got the motivations on the end customer side. So as you know, I talk about the 7 pillars, and one of those is about understanding and managing stakeholders. And I can just imagine you've got stakeholders around a table. If you can identify the different motivators of those people around the table, that's going to give you a much better idea of how you can make software adoption successful, because you know what's driving their action, whether, and that whole idea of whether they're future focused or achievement focused, and those things can really sort of help. And actually you've probably got different, or you will have different motivators around the table, won't you, that will have an impact and will play a part in how you have to manage those stakeholders and the kind of communication that they'll need and the kind of information that they'll want from you. And then similarly, you've got the users, and and that what's in it for them, and they will have different motivators, and you have to sort of tap into all of those with your whole audience.
I think the useful way to think about it is that everyone's got different questions they're asking in their heads, which are driven by their motivations. So one of the things I talk about is if we were given a plot of land with planning permission on it, the way we see that plot of land and the way we want to develop it would be very much driven by our motives, our motivations. So for instance, if I'm driven by, say, making a difference, then that plot of land, I'd think, well, I want to make a difference to the community, I want to do this, that and the other. It might want to be environmentally, all the other things that make a difference to other people as a wider community. But if I was driven mainly by money, and let's remember, there's nothing wrong with being driven by money. And actually, the thing I see is a lot of teams have a lack of it, and then they become less, or they're not commercially focused enough. So going back to the scenario with the plot of land, if someone is driven by money, the way they see that plot of land is, how can I make as much money as possible from that land? And there's no right or wrong in those scenarios. I'm not saying the person that wants to make a difference is a better person to the other person, but it's just remembering that different people will see different things in a different way, and their actions will be driven by their motivations.
So does that mean, from a team point of view, have you seen that works to have a good balance, like a balance of those motivators, so that you get those different perspectives, because then there's a sort of a much more holistic view, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, there's certain things that if you bring a team together, they're brought together for a reason, or a remit, whatever their remit is. And once you've got that remit, you think, right, well, what have they got to achieve, and what is the motivations that will allow that to happen? So if it's very much a commercial thing where you've got to make lots of decisions around making money, and you have got very little motivations, the builder motivated, which is what we call it in the motivational match language. If there's very low drive with the money in that, or in that team, the question is, will they ever be able to deliver what they need to deliver? And that's the question you've got to ask. So yes, you need a balance, but first of all, you've got to think about the key drivers that you need to have within that team. Another scenario might be a customer service team, where you want them to be caring and making sure that they are going that extra mile to look after clients. Well, one of the motivations there you might be looking out for is making sure that they've got high searcher, so making a difference and being connected to the outcome, and making sure that they are doing everything they can for the client. And if that's low in the team, then again, is your customer service not up to scratch, because people aren't really driven to make a difference? There's other things going on.
So presumably that means, I talk about people having the right skills, but actually it's the right skills and the right motivations.
Well, that's the two things we've got to get right. And let's remember that motivation on its own won't create any good outcome. We need skills and knowledge, obviously, but those in combination. So a quick exercise to do is to give yourself a score out of 10 for both those elements. So out of 10, how do you score yourself with regards to the skills and knowledge, the ability to do your role? And then give yourself another score out of 10 with regards to how motivated you are, or how easy it is to get out of bed to do your role, and then multiply them together to get a percentage. But what we really want to be doing is making sure that both those levels are high. So it's high skills, high motivation is going to be the optimum position to be in. So let's not get carried away with motivation. Obviously, it's important, but it doesn't replace skills. But you can train skills. But you've got to question whether you actually can, instill motivation in someone, and that's something to ponder, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's funny that you kind of went on to that, because the phrase that was going through my head was that whole recruit for attitude, train for skill. So I'm just thinking about the organisations I speak to, that they go through restructures, particularly as they're growing as organisations, and trying to get people in the right place in the organisation, and also the challenges with the recruiting. And I think motivation plays a big part in that, doesn't it? If they've got the motivations right for what you're trying to achieve, in the type of role that you try, or the team that you're trying to put them in, and then, like you say, you can train the skills bit to be able to get them to do the nuts and bolts of what the role requires.
Yeah, and I think it's worth remembering there when you talk about change, or improvement, or whatever you want to call it. Organisations are always going through change, and it's a good idea to have a handle on how change-friendly people are as well. And that's one of the things that you can get from a motivational map as well, is that the more growth motivated they are, that future-driven, they like change. Tend to be they embrace change. If they're more relationship motivated, then they tend to be more reluctant, in that they need a bit more information. They need constantly, just a bit more information to make sure that they're on board. They won't take it just for the sake of change. There'll be more questioning. And there's nothing wrong with that. You want to encourage that. Change for change's sake is the worst thing that you can probably have with an organization, if you're constantly changing and not ever really making any progress. That's what you want to make sure that you don't do, because what you do want in a team is those that are going to question and check, and if we get on that cycle of change, and no one's checking, are we making any progress, then again, you're not really going to make the progress you want if you haven't got that sort of thing. So going back to that, having balance is a good thing, to have a blend of different people that are, yes, future friendly and change friendly, but also will also be checking and questioning to make sure that the decisions that are being made are not just made too quickly, and that the organisation just goes round and round in circles.
And what sprung to mind then was this whole idea that we said right at the beginning about the self-awareness and that understanding that, well, my motivations are X, but actually not everybody's like me, to then be able to be empathic about how other people might be feeling, and to put those things in place in terms of the support, the communication, the training and so on, that supports people that maybe aren't so comfortable with change. And I suppose, having a team that maybe are doing the implementation, they're really comfortable with the product, they're really comfortable with change. To them, that it's that whole putting themselves in someone else's shoes, isn't it, of that actually the person on the other side of the table may not feel the same, may not have the same motivators.
Absolutely. Sharing this information is really, really powerful within a team. It's obviously you've got to have a bit of trust, but in saying that, within a motivation, when you're sharing your motivations, there's no judgment in that. There's no good or bad. There's no good motivator and no bad motivator. That's, it's all in context, whether something's working within the environment that it needs to work in. But I think the important thing is that the team leader, if they are aware of the mix of motivations, firstly, they know the strengths and weaknesses of each individual in that team. They know the strength of the overall team and where their motivations are going to help them, and maybe their motivations could cause them a few problems. But that person just having that information is, if they're trying to lead a team, it's very difficult a position to be in. Leadership skills are obviously essential, and I'll teach it day in, day out. But if you've got information around what motivates your team, it gives you such a head start. It knows, basically, then how to behave, and how to use the right language. Going back to the language thing, we're talking about here, communication. If you can have a way of communication, because that's what a language opens up around motivation. Firstly, the team will understand themselves better, and then the team leader, manager, leader, or what you want to call them, has an advantage in that they know the sort of language that they should be talking in that will actually be picked up in a positive way by their team, and also things that maybe to avoid that may be seen as a bit, not appreciated.
And that's really nicely led on, actually, to you talking about leadership. And I talk quite a bit about sort of leadership with a little L. And if we think about the context of software adoption, you've potentially got, say, a project manager or an account manager or someone within the software organization that is trying to lead this change and work with their customer to sort of lead the change. But then there'll obviously be the official leaders within that organization, but it's almost that sort of leading without authority. But again, this whole sort of idea around motivation and understanding motivation can really help them, can't it, in that role?
Yeah, and what I start with my clients is that you've got to be the most motivated person in your team to lead well. If you're not, then you're never going to be a good leader, because I believe that leadership is very much about a transfer of energy, and motivation is energy. So in the first instance, you've got to be in that position where you're motivated, your motivations are being met, and you're feeling that you're in a position that you're comfortable, and you can operate from a position that you've got the skills and you've got the motivations. That's the position to be from. So that's where I always start from. There's no point in going in and just giving a load of skills around how to lead a team to someone that doesn't want to lead or doesn't want to manage, because they're just straight away, they're not really going to be engaged in it, because it's not something that they really want to do. But if we take it back the other way and say, right, okay, before we go into skills, let's see what motivates you and what does motivate within the role, and then get that right. And then what we're going to do then is look about how we can introduce a leadership sort of program training, so that you can use that motivation together with some leadership skills to make your life easier. Your team will appreciate what you do for them, and altogether, the business will benefit. So it's a little bit of turning things around a bit, rather than give skills first, think about motivations first.
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of key tip actually for the organizations, particularly, like I say, when they're thinking about that structure and sort of the right bums on the right seats, is that whole think about the motivations of those people first rather than the skills. So yeah, they might have demonstrated excellent skills in a particular role, but actually the motivators aren't right for that, and they need to use those skills in a different way in a different part of the organization. So in terms of kind of that whole leading change, and say we talk about people that are trying to kind of lead that change within the customer organization, and they're trying to understand the motivations of the stakeholders and the users. They're not going to be able to do motivational maps profile for all of those people. So what's your advice for people in terms of kind of being able to do that, I suppose, on a broader scale?
Well, there's if you look at the 9 motivators, you don't have to use an online diagnostic. If you look at the 9 motivators, you can do a manual sort of scan through. And what's a good exercise to do is do it in pairs. Is look at the 9 motivations and have them in front of you. And what you need to do is actually compare all 9 against all 9 against the other 8. So it's a break. You can work out that there's actually 36 questions you've got to ask there. And once you've done that, you can actually do it manually. It takes a longer, but you can do it that way. But with regards to when you're looking at an organization's motivation, there tends to be motivations which are sort of, I was going to say popular, but it's not quite the word they mean, that they're prevalent within a certain organization or a certain type of business. So we're talking about software engineers here and that software sort of environment. So we want, it's very sort of detail orientated, isn't it? It's about having, we've got to get the detail right. And that tends to be those, what we call the defender motivators, are the ones that like do the detail and checking things. So what we can do is that we can see certain behaviors that crop up, and you can see them naturally sort of happening. And there are certain questions we can ask people which will get a certain response, and that would probably indicate the sort of how their motivations are sort of erring. But when you look at a larger organization, there's no better way obviously than actually mapping an organization. But it's a tricky one to answer, because really what you need to do is have a scenario. Because once you've had a scenario, if you have a scenario, then okay, so if that's the scenario, this is what the organization does, and this is what the team does, then there will be some certain questions you can ask, which would probably get an idea of what motivates that team and the things that they like doing. So what you're saying really is that by having those kind of key questions and asking the right questions, you can draw that information out. And I think what Elsa picked up on there is we've got another interview around culture, but actually motivation links very much to culture. And so, if a software company works in particular sectors or particular types of organization, there's probably going to be some sort of crossovers in what are kind of core motivators within that industry or within those organization types. But then also when you get into a particular organization, sort of understanding their culture as an organization will give some clues to what the drivers are behind, the why behind the business and the motivation behind the business. And therefore the people that are attracted to work for that business will probably have a certain amount kind of element of that motivation as well. Would that be? Yeah, absolutely. Well, culture is very much linked to values, and and motivations are very much linked to values. So that's the link. It's the values piece, which when we think about a value, it's linked to a behavior and the things we do or don't do. So it's a really valuable thing to do, is understand what the values are and how they are. Not necessarily just put them in words, actually put them into actions. What does that what does that value actually mean? So for instance, let's think of, say, honesty. Honesty seems to come up a lot. So what does that actually mean? How do we see that value in action? So we need to put it in a way where that we need to, when we're in a meeting, then we need to be open and honest when we are in, discussing certain things or whatever it is. Honesty, if we say, well, always have to be honest, then does that mean you've always got to make comments that are, inappropriate just to be honest? So obviously we don't want that happening. Mm-hmm. So it's clearly we need to make sure that the values are very much linked to culture. And if we think about values with regards to motivation, there's a link there. So another way that we can tap into those values is to think about, well, what is driving the organization? Why do we do what we do? And what's the important thing? And how one of my sort of business friends, she does a lot of work with regards to helping accountants to look at how they can differentiate themselves. The challenge that she has is that the motivations that an accountant has are pretty much opposite to what she needs them to be creative and bring in new ideas. Because what you want from an accountant is you want them to be steady, meticulous, and all those sort of things, and not really want them to be too sort of, out there doing things that are out of the ordinary. But putting a brand together, that's very much around being very sort of, right-brained. Whereas, the right side of the brain was a bit more creative as opposed to the logical side. Yeah. So that's the scenario, that's the sort of dilemma you've got with certain organizations where they might need to do something, but their motivations don't allow it, or they need an awful lot of encouragement and training to allow it to happen.
Yeah. It's really interesting, actually, that you picked, in terms of values, you picked honesty, because if I think about sort of some of the things that I see in terms of, say, customer support and sort of the customer service side of things, and if people have got that honesty value, that there can be a tendency to overshare, and it's a case of understanding, well, we're not asking you to lie, we're not asking you to go against the value of honesty, but actually you don't need to share everything. And by not sharing everything, it doesn't mean you're being dishonest. It's just, pick and choose what should stay internal versus what is appropriate to go external. And also that understanding of the person that you're communicating with, of, that whole, what do they want? And maybe they don't want all the detail anyway. Who are you talking to? Are they someone that has the same values or different values? And
that's why it's better to have a value that's a statement as opposed to just one word, because you can interpret one word in many ways. We know what happens when people send us like short text messages with, we can interpret a text message because it's the way because there's no punctuation in it in lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. So it's important to actually understand, what is the behavior we're looking for, which actually is backed up by that value, as opposed to the other way around, where you leave it open to interpretation. That's the last thing you want.
Yeah, definitely. So any other sort of top tips that you would give software companies in terms of motivation, thinking about it to drive software adoption and the success of their businesses?
Well, obviously, there's lots we can carry on talking about with regards to the motivations within an organization, and think about how you interact with your customers and all that sort of stuff. But I think just being aware that there are going to be some strong motivations within an organization, but just because of the nature of it. But then thinking about, well, if we want to change, have we got enough of the motivations that we need in the organization to allow that change to happen? So that's the thing that we've touched on a little bit about change management. And we've got to realize that if we are just recruiting the same people time and time again, all you're going to get is the same outcome. So if you want change to happen, that means probably that you need to get the different type of people to allow that change to happen. hopefully that makes sense. But and that's how I see things. It's how, because going back to your first question was, what is motivation? It's our motive to take action. And we've got to remember what's in it for us and what's in it for them. And and that's the crucial thing. What's in it for me? Why should I bother doing this? And the reason why I would bother is because it's important to me and it matters to me. It matters to me that I'm driven by this. So, and it's being connected to a purpose. So important these days. A lot of people talk about, having a why in the business. You mentioned it, but essentially what it is, that people want to come to work to have something that they feel that they're making a difference and doing something that's purposeful and making it a difference to someone. It doesn't have to be a change in the world sort of scenario, but as long as you are connected to the outcome that you contribute to, and that's the key. And if we link that to leadership skills, the one thing that I bang on about all the time is catch people doing things right. You need to do it 4 or 5 times more often than you catch people doing things wrong. So just make sure that you notice when people are doing things right, because that reinforces that they know that the right thing is being done and that they are then connected to an outcome. That's the key.
Excellent, Mark. And I've kind of come full circle, because as you were talking, I was thinking back on the sales piece and that whole sort of the motivation for change. And almost, if you can't draw that out of the customer during the sales process, and you haven't got the people sort of around the table that have got that motivation for change, to me, that's an alarm bell of actually walk away from this sale, walk away from this customer in a positive way, that so that when they have got the right motivation to change, be back there as the top of the list to do the change. Because actually, if the motivation isn't there, then that change project is at risk of falling flat on its face, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I have limited knowledge of software implementation, but I have had a retail business which extensively used EPOS, which is obviously a big investment, and we changed our EPOS system, I think, in our years about 3 or 4 times. And going back to the decisions that I made, it was not just about the cost of the product. It's about the ongoing cost of, how long is it going to take to put in place? How long is it then going to be that I to train everyone so that they know how the new system works? How much disruptions is it going to cause? How much short-term loss for the retail was, like, how much loss of productivity, and how much extra is it going to cost me because I've got to have more staff there while we have that transition and all that sort of thing. So when you're selling something like a software, it's really important to remember that that's probably what's more important to that person that's buying the software than anything else. They've probably done their investigation. They probably already know that you can supply them with what they want and the outcome with regards to the technical know-how you've got. But what they want to hear from you is, yeah, but are you going to be there? Are you going to make sure that this actually works? Are you going to be there to show us how to implement it? Are you going to be there to support us with training? Are you going to be there for all these other things that are the things that come after the purchase? That are really crucial with regards to making sure that a software is implemented into a business efficiently, so the outcome and what they want is, what is it, the outcome they're looking for? Is it to be more efficient, or whatever that it is? It's that the outcome is important, but it's also just as important to think about how it's going to be implemented and brought into an organization. And that's the questions they're probably going to be wanting asked more than anything.
And it's almost that if the change is too hard, if it's going to create too much work for them, then they won't be motivated to do it. So the easier that and the supplier makes their life, and the clearer they set out that process and sort of reassure them that they'll make it as simple as possible, then the the more likely they want to move forward, but also the more likely it will be successful.
Yeah, and also on taking on to a sort of marketing level, look at the 9 motivators. Think about how you can address each one of those 9 motivators within your marketing, and then ask questions around them, going back to your, how you can sort of use the motivation within, without actually sort of motivate, doing a motivational map exercise, is think about how you introduce the questions around those 9 motivators, going from making a difference down to security and money and belonging, all those sort of things. If you can introduce something that addresses all those 9 motivators, and then you can say, well, is there anything particularly in our brochure that sort of stands out as a reason why we might be the right person? And that might be a good way to say, well, and whichever they sort of indicate might be a good idea, good indication of the motivations behind their purchase.
Excellent. Great tip. So we've talked about it from marketing to sales to implementation. I think we covered the full process, and we've also talked about sort of support and service as well, so that ongoing piece,
and also leadership. It comes up everywhere. It has such a big part to play in so many aspects of the business.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm sure we could carry on talking all day, but we will leave it there. What I'll do is I'll put your details in the notes so that people can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you, motivational maps. Also, I will mention that you have written a book. So I'll put the link in for that so that people can check out your book as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. I really enjoyed it.